All right, let's jump right in. Today we're going to explore a really fascinating model that connects the strange, story-like structure of our dreams with the incredibly complex experiences of psychosis. It's kind of a journey into the hidden architecture of the mind.
So think about the last dream you can actually remember. Did it feel like a story? I mean, even if it was totally bizarre, with scenes changing and weird characters popping up, did it still feel like it was going somewhere? Most of the time, yeah, it kind of does. There's a shape to it.
Well, researchers actually have a name for that shape. They call it the strain arc. It's a pretty simple idea, but it's really powerful. A dream kicks off, some kind of tension or a problem starts to build up, it rises to a peak, and then it finds some sort of resolution or release.
You've probably had one of those classic anxiety dreams, right? Maybe you dreamt of water rising in a room. That's a perfect example. The water level is just that rising tension. Or maybe it's a dream where you're desperately trying to meet a deadline or you're stuck in a really tough conversation. You can feel that pressure just building and building.
And then something gives. You either wake up, the problem magically solves itself, or the dream just morphs into something totally different. That entire sequence, the start, the rising tension, and that final release, that is the strain arc. You can think of it as the basic storytelling engine of our subconscious.
Now here is where things get really interesting. For a long time, researchers have looked at dreaming as this potential window, a way to maybe understand psychosis. But can this strain arc model from our dreams really help us make sense of these waking, altered realities?
This isn't some brand new idea. The comparison between being in a dream state and experiencing psychosis has been around for ages in neuroscience and psychiatry. It's this question they keep coming back to because, well, on the surface, they share some pretty striking similarities.
So why even make the comparison? Well, in both dreaming and psychosis, our normal ability to test reality can kind of go offline. We can have these bizarre, incredibly vivid experiences that feel 100% real in the moment. The crucial difference, of course, is that one happens when we're asleep and the other can happen in our waking life.
And that brings us right to the core question of this whole explainer. Can we actually take that clean narrative structure, the strain arc, and use it to map out the expressions of something as complex as schizophrenia-spectrum disorders? Does that same shape of rising and resolving tension even apply?
To figure that out, we really have to put them side by side. So let's do a direct comparison of what we see in typical dream reports versus the clinical descriptions of what's often called disorganized expression in schizophrenia.
Okay, look at this table. The really huge difference here is coherence. In a dream, the stuff that happens can be completely off the wall, but we can usually tell it as a sequence. First this happened and then that happened. But in what's known as formal thought disorder, the very ability to keep a thought on track can become incredibly difficult. That narrative thread itself can get lost. And we see similar divides when we look at agency and social cognition too.
And this really gets to the heart of it. This is the key distinction. Just because a dream's content is bizarre doesn't mean its structure is incoherent. Waking incoherence is a whole different ballgame. It's about the fundamental mechanics of how we link our thoughts together.
So this brings us to a major roadblock for our model. The whole dream analogy seems to hit a brick wall when we start talking about the phenomenon of disorganized speech, or formal thought disorder.
Just think about it again. In a dream, even a super chaotic one, there's usually a you right there in the middle, experiencing things one after another. You can follow that thread, even if it takes you to some very strange places. But with formal thought disorder, the actual mechanism that connects one idea to the next, the glue holding the story together, can become unstable. So it's not just that the story is weird, it's that the very ability to tell a coherent story, to maintain that continuous arc, can get disrupted.
Okay, so this is a huge problem for our model, right? If the strain arc relies on a story, but the story's thread is snapping, does that mean the whole idea is useless for understanding these experiences? Have we just hit a dead end?
Well, not quite. And this is where the source material proposes a really brilliant solution. It introduces a new framework, one that makes a critical distinction and helps us build a much stronger model. This is the breakthrough. The new framework says we need to think about two different kinds of arcs. First, you've got state curvature. This is the steady, underlying arc of things like physiological arousal, stress, or cognitive control over time. It's a reliable signal. Then there's content curvature, and that's the arc of a specific story or a theme. But this one, it's conditional, it's fragile, it can break down sometimes.
By separating these two things, we can do something incredibly powerful. We can stop focusing only on the story, which might be unstable, and start tracking the much more reliable signal of the person's underlying state.
we can still find a meaningful arc, even when the surface-level narrative is hard to follow.
And this isn't just some abstract theory. It's a practical tool. The idea is you start by tracking those state-level variables first. Then you only try to interpret the story, the content arc, when a stable theme is actually there. And, really importantly, you rate your confidence. You have to acknowledge when the signal is clear and when it's just not.
So why is this shift in thinking so important? Well, it fundamentally changes the entire goal of trying to understand what's happening. We move away from trying to decode symbols, and we move toward mapping signals.
You know, the old way of thinking might be to treat these expressions like a coded message in a dream that you need a special dictionary to decipher. But that whole approach just falls apart when the language itself becomes unstable. This new framework gives us a better way forward.
The new goal, then, is to map the underlying signal of distress, to see the ups and downs in arousal, control, and stress as the brain's real-time attempt to manage an overwhelming internal state. We're not reading a broken story, we're reading a system under strain.
It all comes back to this one simple but powerful idea. There are two curvatures, two different arcs to follow. The underlying, reliable arc of the state, and the conditional, sometimes fragile arc of the content.
And that really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. What if the most useful and maybe even the most compassionate way to understand a mind under severe strain isn't to get lost trying to interpret its broken stories, but to just clearly and carefully map the fundamental shape of its distress?